Okay, it's already 2 past, so I think we're ready to start. Thank you for those who already joined. My name is Patryk Berus. I lead comms at Instrat, and together with Patryk Kubiczek, Instrat's energy modeler, will be your hosts for today. So welcome, and we're very happy to host you. Just a couple of words on the organization of this webinar. I'll start with a quick introduction of our organization, and then I'll let you to the main event, which is going to be Patryk's presentation on PyPSA-PL-mini. But I just wanted to let you know that we are having a Q&A session during the whole time of this webinar. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom, you'll see a Q&A button where you can ask questions during the whole time of our webinar, and Patryk will be answering your questions in dedicated spaces for those. So yeah, let's start. Patryk, if you could change to the next slide. I just see that someone's raising a hand. Okay, not anymore. So I'll start. Just a quick, a couple of words on our organization. Instrat is a data-driven think tank based in Poland. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with some of our work, but I just wanted to give you a wider picture of who we are. We are very much focused on developing in-house tools, especially within in-house data tools, especially within the energy sector. Obviously, what we're going to be talking about today is the in-house energy model that Patryk and his team is developing. And that is PyPSA-PL. What you possibly know us from is also our dedicated energy data hub, which is called energyinstrat.pl. It's functionable in English, so for anyone who doesn't know it yet, I advise you to visit the website. And us ourselves, we've been functioning and on the ground for more than 7 years now here in Poland. But it still feels like we're a young organization, I could say. During the last couple of I would say maybe 3 to 2 years, we really grew and matured as an organization, which you can see on the slide on how many people are there already within the organization working every day to deliver those data-driven tools that I was talking about. Yeah, and that's about it. I think I'll give the floor to Patryk with the main presentation. So enjoy.
Thanks, Patryk, and good morning to everyone. It's so great to see so many of you. We have 34 participants at the moment and still rising, which shows that there is what assumptions they use, and that's exactly the topic of today's webinar. A new tool we developed in Instrat, or better to say we are still developing. Before I start, let me give you some context about the Polish energy system or power system. at the moment, because I think we might have some participants from abroad. So the Polish power system is still based on coal, which is a foundation of the power sector. However, it's a diminishing foundation, and we see those changes happening from year to year. The power sector is a big emitter of CO2. In 2023, we estimated that the CO2 emissions from the power system alone were around 110 megatons of CO2. And that's already been a reduction of 20 megatons compared to the previous year. And as I told you, coal is still the dominating energy source in Poland, but a decreasing one. So its contribution to fulfilling domestic electricity demand decreased from 70% to 58% this year. And at the same time, the renewables share rose from 23% to 29%. So we see changes happening, and obviously that raises questions like how big changes we can expect in future, or maybe what kind of targets we should aim for. And we tried to answer those questions in the modeling work we did last year, which was published in the report that you are seeing right now. So last year we developed 4 model-based scenarios for the future of the Polish energy system until 2040. And our analyses have indicated that by 2040, Poland could achieve as much as 85 to 90% share of renewables in electricity consumption in a cost-optimal manner. And achieving such a target would mean that the emissions from the power sector would drop to like less than 10 megatons CO2 per year. And that would mean that like the policy focus should actually be moved to other sectors, which would be like more difficult to reduce emissions in. I invite you to learn about this report. But today's webinar will be more about the tools. So how can we understand better the logic behind the modeling tools that we used in our report, or many other organizations are using, like showing these optimal future scenarios. And for that reason, we developed the PyPSA-PL-mini model, which I will discuss later on. So this is the agenda for today.
Patryk, sorry for interrupting you, but I see that one of the participants, Frank, whom we know very well, is raising his hand a couple of times. So I'm just going to let him in for a second to ask his question, and then I'll let you continue. Okay?
Okay.
Frank, I let you in to ask your question. Is that a technical issue?
Yeah, it's technical. Sorry from my side. I don't know why it keeps doing it.
Oh, okay. Just a technical. The raised hand is a technical issue.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why it does that. Sorry.
I understood. No worries. Thank you so much. Okay.
And I also see a comment by Robbie. Well, a question that chat is disabled for him. I believe it's disabled for all participants, isn't the case. So in principle, it's good to use the Q&A box to ask questions, right?
Yes, exactly. Please do use the Q&A session then, and do not use the chat if it's not working. Although I don't know why.
Yeah, it should work, but you can still ask questions. Don't worry, and we will answer them. Okay, yeah, so I was just presenting the agenda. So yeah, that's the plan for today. We'll try to wrap up in like 60 to 75 minutes, depending on how many questions there are. So I will start with introducing the tool. Then I will present the first use case, so you can see the model working in action. Then all the time you can ask questions. You can write questions in the question and answer box. And then we will try to answer some of those questions in a short Q&A. Then we will move to part 2, where I will discuss the second use case of the model, I will try to draw some lessons, and then we will have a final Q&A. So what is PyPSA-PL-mini? Well, let me first start by showing you PyPSA-PL, which was the model that was behind the modeling work we did last year. That was the foundation of the report I showed you before. This is a pretty complex model already by now, which has like 4 sectors: electricity, heat, mobility, hydrogen. And I mean, it requires quite high computational power to be run. PyPSA-PL-mini is a simple optimization model, which is intended for testing and educational purposes. Obviously, as all our tools, it's fully open, so you can check it's open, it's source code. You can use it for your own purposes. You can check all the data, and we try to indicate for each data the source. You only see one sector here, electricity, and that's exactly what PyPSA-PL-mini does because it's a simplified model. So how did we reduce the complexity of PyPSA-PL-mini with respect to PyPSA-PL? Well, we focus only on the power sector because we want to start simple. Incorporation of other sectors is very important, especially when we discuss future. But for now, let's just see what the implications for future would be if we assume the model stays more or less the same and some isolation from other sectors. We will not model cross-border flows in PyPSA-PL-mini, even though there is technical possibility, but we do not really model the neighboring countries, which I mean, I think is like quite important if we want to model the trade electricity reliably. Like we need to also see what's happening at the neighbors, but that adds complexity. So we skip it for a moment. Very importantly, PyPSA-PL operates at an hourly resolution for 8,760 hours of a year. For PyPSA-PL-mini, we reduced that to 4 representative weeks, 1 per season, at an hourly resolution. Well, we choose the weeks carefully, like to preserve, like let's say the statistics, seasonal statistics of weather and demand as good as possible, but obviously that's an approximation. And well, maybe it does not refer to the model complexity per se, but it's about what complexity is perceived by the user. We have significantly simplified the inputs and their structure, and it's all open, so I will even show that to you immediately. You have this we made this folder public with all the inputs, and there are like 5 main inputs for the model. And for example, the inputs look in this format, where we have a tab with all the meta information that helps you understand what the definition of the parameters are, and the actual values can be found in other tab, where, for example, now we are looking at technological and cost assumptions. So for each technology, you have defined different parameters which form the assumptions for the model, and the values are provided as well as the source. So I think it's a pretty transparent way of presenting where we get our numbers from. So I really invite you to check this out. But now I will go back to the main presentation. Yes. Okay, and why did we do this, and what do we gain from this reduced complexity? First, we have a model which is fast. It means it runs in a matter of seconds, does not require hidden computational resources. That's why it can be used in a more interactive manner, because the user can experiment with the model directly and maybe test new features. For example, in a Jupyter notebook that I will show you in a second. I believe that this helps also to understand if the model is faster, you can get answers to your questions in a faster way, but also if the model is simpler, has more like modular structure, you don't need to put all the components at once, I think that also facilitates better understanding. And this educational aspect is very important in case of PyPSA-PL-mini. And all of this means that there is a lower barrier entry because we can embed this model in environments which have like minimal or even no coding expertise required. So I will show you some Jupyter notebooks, which, well, in my opinion, can be used with minimal coding expertise. But within a notebook, there are even some apps with some levers and buttons, which actually can be used with no coding expertise. And yeah, I think it's time to go directly to the model and show it to you how it works. And we'll start with the first use case that I prepared for you today, which is some market dynamics under forced operation of conventional power plants. And again, some context. In August last year, we published a report answering the big questions that arose regarding the curtailment of solar PV during very sunny days with little demand. So it was quite widely covered by the media. The fact that the operator had to curtail the solar PVs in hours where we had still like around 6 gigawatt of conventional generation in the system. And like from economic perspective, it would make more sense actually to reduce the conventional generation rather than curtail solar PV output. But for some reason, this did not happen. And in this report, we tried to understand why. And the answer that I think is the most plausible is because the current Polish power system relies on these conventional generators like coal and gas units to provide systemic services such as frequency regulation. But those kind of plants can operate in a stable manner only at around some technical minimum, which is around 40 to 50%. So they need, we definitely need those system services. So if you want to provide them in a stable manner, those plants have to operate even if the electricity itself could be delivered more cheaply. And there are different reasons why those power plants could not, in principle, reduce their power. There are also like some unit level constraints, some ramping limitations, but our analysis suggests that it is actually this systemic services, which is the most contributing factor. So again, if you want to learn more, there is a link. It's an August report. I think it's quite interesting. But now in the example I will show you, I will try to answer this question. And I mean, each good modeling, in my opinion, should start with a question. And the question in this case would be, how does the forced operation of conventional power plants impact electricity market dynamics and systemic costs? So in this question, we will focus on shorter market dynamics. We are not really interested into like optimizing new capacities that could join the system. It's more about to see how the current system would react to different assumptions about forced operation. So this type of problem might be called OpEx optimization, because we just optimize the operational costs, the variable cost of running the power system. So we just optimize the dispatch of the power sources, which means that for each hour we select the generators in such a way that they would minimize the total variable costs of the system. And in an ideal world, that's how markets actually work. You always choose the cheaper source first. So the constraint we have here is exactly this forced operation. So in the model, we incorporated this condition that actually you cannot reduce the output of conventional power plants by more than a certain minimum hourly capacity utilization. Here we treat them in an aggregate manner. So we found out that to to reproduce the 6 gigawatt of conventional baseload, you would have to assume like the minimum hourly capacity utilization rate at like aggregate coal power plant level at around 25%. So that would be the starting point for our analysis. And then having optimized the system for different values of this Pmax PU parameter, this minimum hourly capacity utilization rate for conventional power plants, we can see how the total systemic costs look like, CO2 emission, marginal electricity prices, and so on. And now I will directly go to the notebook which we prepared, which answers this question. This notebook is called PyPSA-PL-mini OPEX, and it's available in the GitHub repository, which we will share the link to after the webinar, or you can find it in our GitHub Instrat PL, and there you will find the model and all the information how to access this notebook. And importantly, this, as you can see, this or maybe we'll learn, this notebook is opened in a Google Colab platform, which is a service provided by Google for free, actually, which allows one to run Jupyter notebooks. So Jupyter notebook is a technology which allows to run code in a way that is also rich with some contextual descriptions, and it's quite user-friendly. And so here we have this notebook which incorporates which a PyPSA-PL-mini is embedded in this notebook, and this notebook can be used to step-by-step learn about the workings of the model. And there are instructions. And in this webinar, we really do not have time to look exactly what those steps are. But I mean, I invite you to look into this maybe later. Maybe some facts that would be helpful. So here are some parameters that define the model run. For example, it's important to tell you that we use weather data, not exactly from historical years that we are focusing on. In this case, it would be 2023. But actually, we use weather data from some historical data for which we have time series of availability of renewable energy, for example, from ENTSO-E analysis for long-term planning. So just because of this, we really don't have this ENTSO-E data available for the last year. That's why we use this 2012 year as the weather year, which is also the same year we used in our modeling from last year. So again, I think one can learn quite a lot about how energy model works, which components they have from analyzing this notebook. I have already run this notebook, so we don't have to wait for dependencies to be installed. So I will just go directly to the bottom of the notebook, where we have some kind of interactive application. I believe I can even open it full screen here. Yeah. So at the top, we have a lever, which lets us define what kind of level of this conventional operation we want. So as I told you, 25%, 0.25 is more or less the current situation. And then when we click run, we will generate a lot of graphs that will let us see the situation, the output of the model. And interestingly, there are always two columns in this app. So the left column will show you the previous result, and the right column will show you the current results. For example, if we are now interested in the situation where there is no conventional baseload, let's just consider a situation where the coal power plants are totally flexible and they can really go down to zero when there is such a need. And we accomplish this by setting Pmin PU to 0, and then we click run. And that's what I told you, it's pretty fast. So in a couple of seconds, we will have a total set of results. So yeah, again, on the right-hand side, we have the result for P-min PU 0, so the totally flexible power plants. On the left-hand side, we have P-min PU 25%, which are like quite inflexible power plants. And what we are seeing here is one of those 4 representative weeks of generation. We see the generation structure in terms of technologies, and it's really visible, the difference. Yeah, you see here on the left, the hard coal power plants, which are at the bottom. They operate kind of in a baseload way, like with very little variation. While on the right-hand side, we see that there are peaks and that they only cover some peak demand. While, for example, the lignite plays a way larger role. It is so because according to the data we collected for 2023, actual lignite might have been a cheaper electricity source than hard coal. That's why the model uses more lignite in the case where power plants are flexible. Also, you see, for example, in the last days, the green and pink are wind and solar PV. And you see that in this particular example, there is possibility for these renewable energies to cover, like, let's say, well, it's like looks like 80% of the total electricity generation. While in the case with inflexible operation on the left-hand side, in this same day, there was a big curtailment of this renewable energy because basically the power plants reached their technical minimum already. And that's why you also see a way larger utilization of electricity storage technologies in this case, because it definitely makes sense to store some renewable electricity rather than just waste it. Let's look at the prices, because the model can also provide the price, but okay, one needs to make a very strong explanation here and like limitation that, okay, in such an ideal market model, the price will always be the marginal electricity production costs, while obviously we know in the real world there are also other factors influencing the markets. Okay, but for now, let's assume that the price is just determined by the marginal generator. So it means like if we wanted to procure 1 extra megawatt-hour of electricity, how much would we have to pay? That's basically the marginal electricity cost that is shown. And in a case where we have curtailment caused by the inflexible operation of conventional power plants, we have quite a lot of moments where the electricity price drops to 0 because the marginal cost of producing electricity in renewable sources is close to 0. So in a situation where we have curtailment, if we wanted to buy an extra megawatt-hour of electricity, we would just reduce curtailment. So we would basically buy this electricity from renewable generators. The situation is different if the conventional power plants are very flexible, because then, okay, in the current Polish system, we will not see yet a situation where renewables could cover 100% of the total demand. So in the merit order scheme, it would be always closed by some more expensive generators, such as older coal power plant units. And that's why when we allow to conventional power plants to operate more flexible, actually we would not see this drops to 0 in electricity prices. So effectively, the electricity prices would be higher. And yeah, I mean, there are lots of other graphs that I could show you, and I invite you to look at them by yourself maybe later. I will maybe show again, like to continue this discussion about prices, I will show you this graph, which is about average unit cost and price. I think it's important to know that there is a distinction between cost and price. So in a situation with inflexible operation of power plants, on the left-hand side, the unit cost is around 566 PLN per megawatt hour, where in the case of flexible operation, it's lower. it's understandable. We can use more renewable energy. The system operates in a more efficient way because it's less constrained. However, as I showed you, because of this effect of like the marginal generators, the average prices in a case of very flexible generation is actually larger than in the case of baseload operation. So I think it's very important to keep in mind this distinction between prices and costs. Okay, let's jump back into the presentation, and I will make a short recap of this example. And I remind you, you can always ask me questions in the chat, which I will answer in a minute. Oops, I have some problems. Actually, all these facts, all this story that I told you, it's in the slides, and the slides will be made public later, so you can just go back to it and see some screenshots. So I will just skip it for a moment and just go directly to the summary of this question. So like what kind of answers could we get using PyPSA-PL-mini to the questions we posed? Well, higher costs. The more inflexible operation of conventional power plants, the larger the systemic cost of delivering electricity, because we curtail more renewable energy and we have to burn more fossil fuels, which are expensive to burn. Higher emission, okay, that's also quite obvious. The less you will utilize renewable energy sources, the more we curtail them, we miss the opportunity to lower the emission. I showed you that this inflexible operation of conventional power plants means lower market prices, because this forced non-economic operation of plants make it more likely for wind and solar to become marginal generators. And that means that at the end, the conventional power plants get lower revenues for two reasons: because they decrease the marginal prices, and they operate too much. They operate at hours where they actually cannot make money on the market. So effectively, we get those lower market prices because these conventional power plants are kind of subsidizing the market. I think PyPSA-PL-mini is quite a good tool to really understand this issue with prices, with costs. So I invite you to look into this example later. And now I would like to, it would like conclude now the first part of our webinar. I already see some questions in the chat, so I will take a couple of minutes to answer them, and then we'll move on to the second part of the webinar. All right. I see Pavel is asking whether we have plans to make PyPSA-PL interactive with a dashboard. Definitely. I mean, I already showed you like a very simple application that can be created using PyPSA-PL-mini, but I mean, I would still consider it a prototype. It's like, it's not for a very general user yet. And if we see interest from you or from other parties in developing some tools, like web-based tools which would incorporate PyPSA-PL-mini, we will definitely consider that. But I would see it more like happening maybe like in the next year, or yeah, not in a very close future. Frank, quick question. In RES definition, do you count nuclear energy and biomass as renewable energy sources? We do count biomass as renewable energy sources, even though it might not always be justified. I'm aware of all the problems with that. Nuclear energy, no, it's not renewable energy in our definition. In the scenarios we made last year, we had a scenario with nuclear energy and without nuclear energy. So in a scenario with nuclear energy, you would get more like 85% of renewable energy. And in a scenario without nuclear energy, obviously, you would get more renewable energy sources, because like for 2040, we estimated the nuclear could be like around 7% of the well, depending on scenario. Well, I will not go into details. You can check the report for yourself. How would the model help answering how much of long-term storage we need in PL system? I think I will not try to answer this question now, because actually the other use case I will show you would shed way more light on this issue. But okay, like general remark I can make now is storage, the more inflexible your demand is, the more storage you need, because then you need to transfer this electricity, renewable electricity, from one hour into another. So the fact that the conventional, but it's also required, it also refers to actually supply. The more inflexible supply you have, which kind of blocks renewable energy, also the more storage you need. And we have seen this in the previous example, that in a situation where we have very inflexible operation of conventional power plants, actually more storage is utilized more. It brings more value to the system. And as we will see, like we kind of assume the demand as of 2023 with no possibility of sectoral coupling. So it's pretty inflexible. And then in the next example I will show you, we'll see quite a substantial capacity of batteries that could be optimal part of the mix. Sonam Parashar, is there any scope to simulate energy storages in the markets in the PyPSA-PL? Yeah, but like the model will still like is limited to arbitrage. So just the electricity, the revenue you can make just by buying cheap and selling expensive. But there's more markets than that for storage, which are, for example, the system services. So I think it's a great connection that we have now, because like we argued that the system services in future could be provided way more cheaply actually by batteries. And that's like an additional source of income for them. So even if they could not earn so much money on arbitrage, I think there is a pretty big market for them in this systemic services like frequency regulation. So in a way they could like displace conventional power plants in this market. All right, I don't see any more questions. I think I will move forward to the next part, which is again, yeah, exactly. What would be the optimal electricity mix in 2023? This question is, if like the full formulation of this question is, what could be Poland's cost optimal electricity mix in 2023, assuming no limitation on new capacity deployment? This question is a little bit ill-posed, because obviously there are limitations on new capacity deployment. However, I still think it's useful to like consider such a theoretical scenario. Like, for example, if we could plan like 10, 15 years ago, knowing exactly the demand of today, what would be the outcome? So this is more or less the questions we will be answering now. So yeah, please take the result with a grain of salt, because now we are actually like planning for 10 years in ahead, and the situation in 10 years will be very different than the situation now. But yeah, it's exactly the idea to keep things simple and don't complicate them too much. So the question is about this time, it's not only about dispatch, but it's also about optimal investments. So to the variable costs that we optimize, we'll be also adding fixed cost, which is the maintenance of existing or plant infrastructure, and also the investment cost. And there is some methodological problem here, because all the simulations I'm showing you, they optimize the annual cost. While if we have big investment, obviously, we make use of this infrastructure for many years ahead. So that's why there is a need to convert this like overnight investment cost into some annual way. And we do it in a process called annualization, which is basically a kind of taking into account the expected lifetime of an asset, the assumed discount rate, or we can even equate discount rate with some cost of capital, of cost of financing. So we kind of convert the overnight investment cost in like annual payment. So if you take a loan, the cost we take is how much, what would be your annual payment of this loan. To keep things, and also like it's also like the result will strongly depend on which is the opportunity space we assume. And in different scenarios, one might make different decisions, also based on like likelihood of certain technologies being in a mature state enough to be able to deploy. So it's very important like to define which technologies will allow the model to deploy, to invest in, and which will allow them to retire, because also maybe there are some technologies which we do not want to retire, or maybe there will be difficult to retire for some reasons. And also cost assumptions. The result will obviously be dependent strongly on the costs of new infrastructure, also about carbon pricing, which drives the energy transition, which makes the old coal power plants quite unprofitable. But all these assumptions are uncertain for long-term planning. So it's very useful, I believe, or even necessary for such to answer such questions in a robust way, to explore consequences of different assumptions. And actually, like interactive models are like PyPSA-PL-mini are very good in doing that. And again, we follow the same procedure. I will open the notebook, which tries to address this question. Again, the structure of the notebook is very similar to the one we showed before. Okay, maybe there is focus more on different aspects. For example, the fact that there are different costs. Maybe I will just show you one of the graphs. So one needs to be very careful when discussing costs, because there are different costs. And also in different time scales. Like we quite often see some studies like naming costs, like all the accumulated costs from today to 2040 or 2050, how much the transition will cost. In our models, in our work of Instrat, we believe it's more useful to look at like annual cost, how much the system would cost that in 1 year, rather than to add costs from different years, because then there is also the issue of discounting, and I think like it's easier to get a grasp of what actually costs are if we look at annual values. And also like to make distinction between different annual cost components. So for example, here we see more or less the situation of today. What are the annual cost components of running the power system? We see that the variable costs, which is the fuel purchase cost and some other variable cost of running power plants, of like producing electricity, and they are pretty high. Also CO2 cost is pretty high because we rely on this coal, while the fixed costs are already smaller. And investment, well, they can be large if we want to have cheap system. So the investments will be large, but because we get savings on the variable cost, the total cost might not be that big. Okay, that was just a digression. I will go directly to the app, which is at the end. So here we have quite a lot of levers compared to the previous case, but we will go step by step, changing, well, not too many levers at one time. So what we are seeing now, and yeah, let's focus on this one. So this is the installed electricity generation capacity. And what you are seeing now is already after the optimization of investments. So we did this optimization of investments under the assumption that the system operates more or less as it is operating now with this conventional base load. And like really, we don't really even give the opportunity like to retire old coal power plants, okay, because it's controversial issue. So let's in such a status quo situation, the question is how much new capacities, and in this case we defined the capacities that we can invest in as wind, onshore, offshore, solar, PV, natural gas power plants, and also batteries. Okay, there is no nuclear at this point because let's start from the short time scale. We know there will be no nuclear in a couple of years. So in this, under this assumption, we find out that the current system with this curtailment and so on there would be like economic space for the addition of around 9 gigawatts of wind onshore compared to the 2023 situation. And I believe it's like around 1 gigawatt of solar PV. So not much solar PV. I mean, that should not be very surprising because we already see this big curtailment of solar PV. So probably we have already reached like economic limit of adding solar PV now. But it might change, okay? And the easiest thing to change, and it's already happening, I believe, is like to try to make those power plants operate in a more flexible manner, like to find alternative providers of systemic services. So let's see what the optimal capacity additions would be if we assume the flexible operation of the conventional power plants. So we do it by moving this lever here to 0. We run the simulation. This simulation will take a little bit longer because it optimizes not only dispatch, but also capacity investments. But still, it's pretty fast. Yep. So there are quite a lot of graphs, and we will not be able to discuss all of them in this webinar. But I think this is one of the most interesting one because, yeah, exactly, we ask about this capacity. And then at the end, I will show you the production mix as well. Okay, so we allow the conventional power plants to operate in a more flexible manner, and that makes a big difference. So now, if we allow the power plants to operate in a flexible manner, we find out that the potential for optimal capacity addition is way larger. It's like 9 gigawatts in solar PV, or even like 24 gigawatts in wind onshore. So you see, like this assumption about how the conventional power plants operate is has very far-reaching consequences. And like we see many modeling studies in Poland, some of them assume a very flexible operation of conventional power plants. Some of them assume we will still need this conventional baseload of coal until 2040, and the results will obviously be very dependent on this and will be very different. So I advise you to be very careful about checking such assumptions in any modeling study you might read. Okay, but let's allow even more, let's say, freedom to the model. Like, let's see now what would happen if we allow to decommission some of the coal-based power plants. By decommissioning them, we will be able to save on maintenance costs, which are quite substantial. And again, the same graph. Yeah, so it definitely makes economic sense to decommission some of the coal power plants. Instead, what we get are batteries, because batteries answer this problem of variability related to renewable energy. So the less firm capacities we have as hard coal power, the more batteries we need. And then we see indeed in this case, it's about 4 gigawatts of capacities that would need if we were able to decommission the coal power plants in an optimal manner. The capacities of renewables are kind of similar. Okay, there is more solar now economically possible, 4 gigawatts more of solar. But solar comes with batteries. I think it's not a coincidence. The more solar you have, the more batteries you have. And if we are able to save on the maintenance cost of hard coal power plants, makes sense to install more of them. Okay, let's try to move farther into future, because now we are at CO2 prices of around 83 euro per ton of CO2. Around 2030, we might reach around as much as 140 euro per ton of CO2. So let's see what would be the optimal investments then. So we move the CO2 price lever to 140 and we repeat the whole operation. And compared to the previous case, we see some differences indeed. The new wind capacity is still more or less the same. However, there is even more solar and batteries recommended because, it's like the more carbon pricing we have, the renewables are getting more advantage. Interestingly, like now we have more decommissioning of coal power plants. We are decommissioning not only hard coal, but also lignite. But then we need some natural gas-fired capacities. So one can say that in case of high carbon prices, natural gas-fired capacities displace coal power plants, which is like a known fact, yeah, because the natural gas-fired power plants actually have higher efficiencies than hard coal, lower investment costs, and also like lower emission factor. Well, if we don't take into account all the supply chain, but would have to do it also for coal. So here we just take emissions at the point of combustion. So carbon prices increased, favor more batteries, favor more gas in place of coal. Interestingly, also, I think I'm having some technical issue with the model now. I think it happens in Google Colab that your after some time it gets disconnected. So probably we'll have to try to rerun everything again. However, I mean, I have some results in my slides, so maybe I go back to my slides. Because I mean, we're about to conclude this part. So I believe we were in this part where we discussed the high carbon pricing leading to more optimal investments in batteries, and also in natural gas-fired units displacing coal-fired plants. And the next thing we might consider is that renewables are pretty cheap already now, but they will probably be even cheaper in the future. And batteries as well. Batteries will probably see even a more pronounced decline in costs. So there are also levers in the model which allow you to decrease the investment costs of wind and solar and batteries. And that's what we do now. So if we assume that the wind and solar will decrease by 25% and the batteries by 50%, we see that the optimal capacity of wind onshore now increased by like additional 4 gigawatts compared to the previous case. However, the capacity of solar and batteries, it's not so much affected. Well, in case of solar, it might be so because solar is already cheap. It's already the cheapest renewable energy source. So probably the further decrease of costs will not imply that more capacity additions are optimal. Finally, nuclear. Because so far we're not allowing for nuclear to be invested in, okay? But now when we discuss this more distance perspective of, let's say, 15 years, I mean, it's realistic that it's possible to build some plant by that time. However, important caveat, like the default cost assumption we had in PyPSA-PL-mini, actually in recent days, it turned out to be like obsolete, because in one event in Poland, some numbers regarding the investment cost of nuclear were named, and that would be like around 50 billion PLN per gigawatt, which is like around 11 billion euro per gigawatt. And that would correspond to like 150% of our original cost assumption. So quite a big change. So let's incorporate in the model. And under this scenario, we find out that 4 gigawatts of new capacity there are no nuclear now in Poland. So 4 gigawatt of nuclear capacity would be like optimal. And that obviously means that less renewable capacity would be optimal. So here on the right, you see like the final result of optimization, also taking into account nuclear. Interesting fact that you can also see in the graphs in the model is the curtailment. So in both of those scenarios, either like, especially in the scenario where there is no nuclear, the curtailment of renewable energy is pretty high. It's like, it can be like 27% in the case of scenario with only renewable allowed, and 18% in scenario with a mix of nuclear and renewables. It shows that actually renewables are so cheap to build that we can afford to lose quite a lot of this energy in an optimal way. However, I mean, the question arises, okay, how realistic this would be in real world? Because I personally don't believe all this amount of cheap, basically energy for free would be wasted. Regarding the costs, you will also see cost statistics in the outputs of the model. So comparing this nuclear and renewable scenario under the assumptions we made, we don't see much difference actually. However, if you compare, let's say the nuclear scenario, nuclear plus risk scenario, with the hypothetical situation, if the current system would have to run on this high carbon price without any new investment in future, you see like over 40 billion PLN difference. So that would be like annual cost of keeping the system at the status quo. So I think it's even though this model is simple and has to be taken with a grain of salt, I think it's a pretty strong message that one can derive regarding like where our energy system should head. Like definitely it should change quite a lot, and coal should play only marginal role. So here I am at the conclusion of this part. So, well, I had some technical problems on the way, but we can go back to the model later if you have some questions. But I think I could convince you, or at least I could show you based on the model we have, that its solutions incorporating realistic cost assumptions, they are likely to combine nuclear power with renewable energy sources. We have seen that massive curtailment of renewable energy sources may be optimal. So maybe we should not be too dramatic about the the curtailment that we see in the current system, which is not really massive. It does not mean that wind and solar are not cost effective. It just means that probably we have to think of ways how to make even more savings by taking advantage of this cheap electricity. I showed you that batteries definitely have a role to play in the system, especially an inflexible system with inflexible demand. But still, there are some firm capacities. Even at high CO2 prices, we see some, like, let's say, natural gas units being like optimal candidates for being deployed because the system will still need some firm capacities. And the carbon pricing influences the capacity mix. We saw that high carbon prices incentivize battery deployment, and they make natural gas like more economic source than coal. We discussed a lot about model, and I would like to try to like draw some lessons that we could have from like today's event and from using simple models or complex models. First of all, we should remember that each model is just a model, and each model is wrong. Some of them are useful. We hear it very often. It's always important, like, to critically examine what we could have possibly learned from the model by looking at what the model has missed. And I was already mentioning it several times during today's webinar. In the model, we do not have any flexible new demand, which will increase the overall electricity demand, but also will make it more flexible, because in principle, it should be possible to run electrolyzers more in the moments of abundance of cheap electricity. We can use power to heat technologies to make use of like this cheap electricity surplus. And this will all prevent significant risk curtailment. This will actually work in favor of the rest scenario rather than nuclear, because the rest scenario has more curtailed energy that could be in principle economically used. The operation of CHP plants was fixed in our model. However, we know there are alternatives, and CHPs are unlikely to remain at the current capacity. This will make more space for more electricity generators. There was no cross-border flows at all, while actually the possibility to export surpluses of renewable energy might increase actually the profitability of new investments in these energy sources. Also, this possibility to import electricity may help avoid oversized peak capacities like natural gas power plants. Very big missing point is the grid expansion costs. So both those scenarios that I showed you, RES and nuclear dominated, they will require significant grid reinforcements, both at transmission and distribution level. And I mean, this has to be taken into account, or at least uncertainty regarding this point should make us a little bit wary about making very far-reaching conclusions of how much it will cost. I believe it's still this 40 billion of savings per year would allow us to build like a super big power grid. Robust statistics is what we need for some long-term planning, because this was a simplified model and we only based our results on 4 weeks of weather and demand, which is still better than some of the very complex models. We just have some representative days. Okay, I think it's still better to have 4 weeks. But still, if I were to plan some optimal investments, I would probably want to use a model which has more statistics. And the last thing, some policy-based distortions. So there might be some financial instruments regulated by policymakers or operators, some compensation, capacity payments, contracts for differences, which actually might generate some extra costs that were not included in the calculations we did. And in general, this is very difficult to incorporate into models, even non-simple models. So let's remember that. But taking into account all of these limitations, I think we can draw some lessons. So I think it's very evident that renewables make a difference, because we have already seen what kind of savings they do to the current system, and we are able to deploy them at the current system at a quite high pace. It's important to retain the systemic perspective. I showed you in the first use case that lower market prices do not necessarily translate to lower costs, because any compensation for this forced operation, for example, that are paid by the TSO ultimately falls on end users. I provided you with a lot of numbers, statements. Please treat them as some plausible hypotheses. And I think that's what simple models are very good at, because you can derive a lot of plausible statements, which we then can try to verify using other tools, other methods. And finally, I think it's very important to mention that transparency adds value. So details are important, as we have seen. It's important whether you assume this conventional baseload or not. It is important whether you assume nuclear at investment cost of nuclear at like values provided by international organizations, or whether you will see what the current situation in the Polish nuclear program is. So I believe energy modeling and data should really be open source and open access, because it allows really to have meaningful, in-depth discussion. And with this, I will conclude. I thank you very much for your attention. We are looking forward to hear from you now. Also, please, we still will have a Q&A session. I will just also mention that we are very interested in like collaboration. We are open to, if you think PyPSA-PL-mini is an interesting tool that you would you think you can think of some good application of it, you would like to help us develop it, please get in touch with us. We are very open to such communication. Thank you very much, and I will look now into Q&A session. We have 3 questions now from Claudia. Does the tool take into account additional startup costs for coal-fired power plants with an assumed greater flexibility? No, it does not. It's a simple model, and definitely this will make this will work to the disadvantage of coal-fired power plants, indeed, in this optimization case, because indeed there are costs associated with this frequent startups and shutdowns. Robbie, can you replicate these mini scenarios using the full model? Any insights that arise? We have not tried this yet, because also some of the data we use for the mini model have been thoroughly updated. So comparison, we are planning like to update the PyPSA-PL model also in a spirit of PyPSA-PL-mini, and then we will definitely do some exercises like trying to compare like under this new updated data assumptions, whether the conclusions or some numbers would change. We will definitely do that. We have not done that yet. Adam, if we are on cost, then we need to go for energy system bingo favorite, Dunkelflaute. Can we assume res non-production periods in the model? And for your cost optimal option, how long of a non-res period do you assume? Yeah, so it's a question about statistics. Yeah, we need big statistics to make sure we also capture this Dunkelflaute events. And like honestly, like for this PyPSA-PL-mini, we more focused on averages, not really on this Dunkelflaute. We like didn't like really try to define like what kind of Dunkelflaute period we need. I can answer this question maybe by showing some more detailed profiles of generation we have. For example, here. Or no, it's probably better to use this one. It's disconnected again. We have some technical issue with this notebook. Nevertheless, the outputs are here. Oh, yeah, here we can like, so in this app we could only see one selected period. Here we can see all the periods. And so you see there, and so it's like January, March, for example. Here we have like half a day with very little wind generation. Here we also have quite low PV and wind generation. Probably the longest period is here, August, September, where like in these last 2 days, the generation is quite low. So you see, like it's Dunkelflaute, I know it can last way more than 1 or 2 days, but obviously in a simple model like this, it's when we have like 4 weeks at disposal, it would be like very unrepresentative to have like 1 week of Dunkelflaute, because that would really misrepresent the statistics. So yeah, again, PyPSA-PL-mini is probably not the best model to like plan against Dunkelflaute. But I mean, it's an interesting question. Okay, how much would this result actually change? Well, probably would need more capacities than here. Also, like one needs to to remember, like in the long-term planning, for example, the Polish TSO, they always add this margin. I think for long-term planning, it's like margin of 18%. So for the peak demand, and they need to they require that there is like this 18% margin, which also takes into account like possible times of repairs in power plants when they are not available. So yeah, probably if you liked to make some far-reaching interpretation of the results we had here, you probably need to add some margin on top of these firm capacities, because we'll probably need more of them. Anna, which constraints, assumptions the model uses on storage availability, capacity, costs? Yeah, thanks for this question. It's a very good question. Actually, it reminded me of one aspect I did not mention, namely that in here we actually model the power output of storage of batteries and the storage capacity separately. So usually, or very often, we see modeling, let's say like 4-hour batteries, where the ratio of power output to capacity is 4 hours. So they can run, if they are fully charged, then they can run for 4 hours at full output. Here, actually, PyPSA-PL-mini is flexible, it's easy to customize components. We actually can have like 2 separate components, one for the power output, the other for storage capacity. And depending on the scenario, they are like between 3 to 5 hours, which actually confirms that this typical 4-hour assumption is probably quite a good one. The costs, I think our cost is around like 7 for like, if we think about 4-hour battery, it's around 7,000 or 8,000 or yep, I don't want to lie, so I will just go to the data here. Battery, large storage, okay. So for example, for 2000, so for the kind of situation now, which is 2020, it's 1.5 million. It's 1.5 million PLN per megawatt hour. It's just the storage component, which is the dominant one actually. So for example, in the recent modeling by the Narodowe Centrum Badań I Rozwoju, National Center for Research, they assume 1 million. It's a very fast changing technology. In a way, the costs are dropping quite fast. So you see, like we see some significant drops by 2030. But probably our number is a little bit conservative. It's based on the Danish Energy Agency, and which is in general, it's a good database, but it could be updated more frequently also regarding storage. So that's why I was quite confident by assuming in our simulations that the battery cost could drop to 50%, because that would be like 750,000 PLN per megawatt hour, which I think is very realistic in long-term perspective. Apart from this, any constraints? Not really. Well, the constraint is that the capacity of output is the same as charger capacity, but apart from this, there is really no constraint. That would be the last question. If you have some last-minute questions, you can still ask them. If not, that's probably a good moment to finish.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patryk, for this long lecture and the exercise. I just wanted to thank everybody who participated in our webinar for participating. We are going to be sharing the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel, and also the presentation that Patryk was showing is also going to be available on our website. So we'll be sharing links later today, tomorrow the latest. So that's the plan for the upcoming hours. Any last words from you, Patryk? No. So then we want to thank you all, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.